Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a wonderful day. This is Zakiziel here, and I'll be continuing my reaction to Woke Mage Deny Reality, Mage the Ascension player lore, or by TheBurgerkrieg. In part 1, we heard him go about, explain actually a lot about how mages in general work, and also got into two of the 9 traditions, one being the Akashic Brotherhood, and the other being the Celestials. We'll be continuing because I paused it about when he was getting into the type of magic that the Celestials prefer. So the Akashic Brotherhood prefers mind magic, and that one was obvious. I have a feeling that prime magic might have something to do with primordial forces, but I'm very curious to see what that happens to be. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Celestial chorus represents the sphere of Prime, or as I like to call it, the Hegel of magical spheres. It represents
Hegel?
the sublime, incomprehensible primal essence that underlies and universally connects all of magic. Like the Kabbalistic concept of Keter, it is fundamentally divine and incomprehensible, and in the worldview of the choristers, it is the energy that emanates from the One. It is the connecting tissue of all magic that emanates from the One. That does
Oh. So it's sort of like how in several monotheistic religions, people say that they see the touch of the deity they believe in all things.
doesn't mean it's seen as superior to the other spheres of magic, by the way, except maybe in, like, philosophically speaking for some of the choristers. It's definitely the sphere that a lot of players have the biggest time struggling to, like, comprehend what even it's supposed to be. And even when they do get it, a lot of them are like, what? Why did you... you could have put a different thing here. Why did you put that in the game? I know there's maybe like 5 people in my audience who've ever...
Sorry about that. Had a bit of a hiccup with the internet.
Who've ever played, like, Stars Without Number to this extent. But if it helps even one of you, this will be enough. Prime is basically meta-psionics. It allows you to avoid the effects of paradox, to channel more energy than you reasonably should be able to, make things magical that aren't magical, generally like manipulate the flow of magic, and also sense when magic is being used around you, why it is being used around you, and what effect it might have.
Oh. So it sounds like a class of magic that is more about the actual magic system itself than anything else.
Could call it magical theory, but only in the way that it signifies a deeper understanding of the fundamental core of what magic is. The Celestial Chorus is very organized as traditions go. They have access to a complex, old, and experienced, although, often a bit stiff, bureaucratic infrastructure, which has, under some pains, grown to accommodate a lot more denominations and congregations.
I kind of wonder if the Pope is a member of the Celestial Chorus, given how many of their members come from the Abrahamic faiths.
The most powerful institution is the Curia, a sort of council of, like, the most respected, most important choristers that makes all the executive decisions and is tasked with, like, walking the line between the unity of the faiths and the diversity of the faiths. The most powerful individual within the Celestial Chorus is the Pontifex Maximus, which, yes, does mean Pope. And the Pontifex is elected not just by the highest...
The Wizard Pope. I love it.
Elite of the Celestial Chorus, but also by the rank and file. And the job of the Pontifex is to sort of be not just the senior most spiritual advisor to all of the chorus, but also sort of its spearhead toward unity with the divine. The word of the Pontifex carries immense weight and power, as does the word of any of the senior-most church officials, but it is expected that some will disagree and do other things. They're not absolute dictates. They're not these perfect beings, they're just the wisest and most advanced who have shown a capacity for leadership, both in terms of bureaucracy and in leading the choir in song. As the name suggests, singing, primarily choral singing, is the main form of focus for the celestial chorus. But there are many others like prayer, sermons, acts of kindness, charity, invocations, burning incense, just appeals to the shard of divinity within. And even in terms of music, it's not just choral music. There's choristers who do rock and hip-hop and electronic music even. It's all part of the whole big divine. It's all part of...
That's giving me quite a few funny mental images, because at first I was just thinking that, because of how idiosyncratic it is that it's kind of like, in fantasy how paladins may, will recite a prayer or something in order to access the power of the divine in World Darkness. But mentioning that they can even use electronic music and rapping to do their magic was making me imagine a rather funny situation of, granted I know this isn't an example of prime magic, but still, where someone says, buy my mixtape, it's fire, and someone who listens to it just catches on fire.
The one. Or you could not be a singer at all, that's entirely valid. But it is cool to have like a Scott Pilgrim Battle of the Bands type situation going on. It's a very interesting image to put in your head. A few of the classic groups, sects, and factions within the Celestial Chorus include the Children of Albi, who believe that all materialism is bad and must be rejected for an experience of the sublime, and live entirely ascetic, isolated lives where they have nothing to do with anything, so they can leave this wretched shell of a mortal soul behind. That sound familiar to you?
That does. Both, like, it actually reminds me of what some of the members of the Akashic Brotherhood did, but also reminds you of that bit about, I don't remember who in the Bible said it, but there's this whole line about to give away everything you own as part of following Christ.
That sound like maybe a different tradition we've discussed? You see how it's all connected? You see how there's no hard lines between the traditions? The Rastafarians, hardliners of which often clash with the Kuria over their perceptions of black racial supremacy. They have this with all kinds of ethnicities though. Like, this isn't an exclusively black thing, just to like make this clear. There's a lot of racist mages out there. And the Sisters of Gabrielle and all...
Racist mages, and there being a lot of them, sounds quite like that sounds very fitting because of the fact that, for example, the Bible was used to justify slavery and things like that, and how, generally speaking, like a lot of doctrines have actually been used as an excuse to allow people to perpetrate all manner of atrocities against people.
All-female order of Umbranauts who keep a close eye on the side doors of reality to make sure no demons worm their way in. Some rather more unusual choristers might, for instance, be a bit of a more Levian Satanist type figure who thinks of Satanism as the one's way of analyzing the religious precepts that exist and directing the search for divinity inward to the avatar. Of course, then all the Satan stuff like, dark robes and satanic mass, maybe blood sacrifices, even though there's not really some that happens all that much in actual Satanism, would be part of the focus of that mage. Or perhaps a Catholic practitioner of a Caribbean voodoo who is dedicated to the idea that she, teaches people which of the lower that they can get into contact with are agents of God and the One and the Divine, and which other ones are self-interested and much more comparable to demonic influences. Often seen as necromancers and just generally death mages, the chakravanti, also known as the euthanatoi, really don't like to be perceived that way. To them,
You know, with a name in like the chakravanti, I am, well, my first guess is that this might involve of Hinduism or Indian culture in general in some way.
Death is just one of the spokes on the wheel of life, of reincarnation that all existing things go through all of the time. Even the world itself spins on this particular wheel, and they find it a bit myopic that other mages would just focus on that particular aspect of what they do. The way they see it, they are mages because they have been chosen by some type of force to be the stewards, the guardians, the watchers over the great wheel that has this big universal cycle, to make sure it continues spinning properly. To that end, they study the concept of dharma, which is the purpose that every person and being in existence has, and the purpose they need to fulfill in order to do their part in keeping the wheel a spin. Their own dharma is to be the embodification of the concept of karma, which is the thing that the actual force that keeps the wheel spinning and gives everyone their dharma. It's people's fate, basically, and because the chakra
So they believe in the idea that everyone's fated to do a particular thing, or I assume more like there's a particular thing they're needed to do to keep the cycle going. You know, for some people, the idea of fate is very comforting because they believe that means that they don't need to search for purpose in life. If they're just given it and they pursue it, and that is that. To others, though, the idea of everything being, well, predetermined like that, or rather, that a path is laid before you like that. Some people don't exactly vibe with that.
chakravanti are tasked with resolving a lot of, shall we say, rather weird deviations from how karma wants things to go. They're given a little bit of leeway in their methods, because people, especially sleepers, really love to stray from their dharma. So it's very important to guide them back to that purpose. Because what can happen when people stray too far from their dharma is they can, like, disturb the dharma of others in, like, a domino effect. And you really don't want that to happen. And yes, okay, alright, sometimes that means killing someone who has strayed so far from their dharma that they can never possibly return. The chakravanti do not fear death, they see it as just a next step, but they understand that it is a pretty drastic step that could be taken to keep the wheel spinning. And just so this is clear, straying from your dharma is not always a thing you have control over. For a lot of people, part of their dharma is not to be suffering. And yet they are suffering. This is something that the chakravanti seek to correct. Killing someone to protect the wheel of karma is damage control, really. It's to make sure nothing else breaks as well. It doesn't really do much to set things back on their right path. The chakravanti use a lot of different foci to do their magic. They have like soft music and meditation and recitals of all manner of liturgies, but most importantly, the recitals of mantras. Mantras are very crucial in the world of chakravanti focuses. The purpose of these is to become an embodiment, to sort of put on the suit of a god that embodies the power over the cycle of life and death. This could be Kali, this could be Saint Anne, this could be Hades, this could be Demeter. And weapons also are important foci. They are tools of death. They need to be venerated and respected. But it's not like the chakravanti need a gun to kill you. In terms of spheres on the Council of Nine Traditions, the chakravanti hold the seat of entropy, which is indeed the power over over decay, degradation, death, and chaos. It is the great cosmic recycler that breaks everything down into its barest essentials. But, very important, there is a reason why, in certain times and places throughout history, the sphere of entropy was called the sphere of fortune. This is because entropy also governs the manifestation of chance and probability. You know the scene in Ocean's 13 where they go to Mexico to like put this powder into the dice making manufactory thing? And then they have the zippers, buttons that they press, and the dice come out in the exact way that they want them to at the tables. That's entropy magic. That is entropy magic using an alchemical and technological focus. Through this power, the chakravanti...
I'm just imagining that how many ways that can be useful, considering just how much chance there is in just everyday life.
Can and do orchestrate long, convoluted series of seemingly random events that put people on their right path to Dharma. And yeah, that too, they can kill you with that. They can have a piano fall on your head. It's entirely possible. But it's important to stress...
Just a little Looney Tunes-esque demise. Crushed by a falling piano or an anvil. Which, by the way, horrifying way to die. Very messy, but still, in cartoons it's hilarious.
That they only do that as a last resort. All of this really explains why the Greek arm of the chakravanti tradition, which is very big and influential within the tradition as a whole, sees themselves as agents of the fates. Chakravanti history is ancient. They trace their roots back to the Indus Valley civilization, which is like the oldest civilization that archaeologists know about. But
oh, so wait, Indus Valley, is that near where Mesopotamia was? Because I've heard of that area as being the cradle of civilization.
they didn't really come into their own as an organization until the Himalayan Wars. During this war, by the way, a group of proto-chakravanti split off and went to Egypt to make a deal with the mummy to become the Nagaraja bloodline of Vampire the Masquerade, which you can hear all about in my video about Vampire the Masquerade bloodlines that I think are cool. When Alexander the Great tried and failed to conquer India, because it's India, it's pretty fucking big, a lot of Chakravanti found themselves befriending Greek death priests who, while they were doing like mercy killings on the field against people who were like, you aren't supposed to suffer in your final moments, so I'm gonna... Or, you know, healing the ones that could still be healed and whose purpose was to be healed and keep on going. That was the beginning of the global diversification of the tradition because they found they had a lot of common ground, a lot of mutual respect for each other and each other's practices. And because the Council of Nine is a Eurocentric organization, the Chakravanti were actually known as the Euthanatoi until 2001, even though the original tradition was formed back in India, and then the Greeks, like, merged with them. Chakravanti ranks are based on experience.
By the way, that whole thing he mentioned about them making really convoluted plans because of how they can, you know, control probability and stuff like that, it gives me a rather funny mental image of well, how exactly would someone, say, try to interfere with anything the Chakravanti are doing if it's a case where any description of what they're doing would seem so convoluted as to be completely unbelievable to most people? In fact, I kind of wonder if even then the technocracy would be able to tell the difference between an actual plan by the Chakravanti and some story that someone came up with on the fly, given how convoluted that they can be with their plans.
and wisdom, and the higher in rank a mage is, the less they are expected to follow the commands of their superiors. A few of the classic sects, groups, and factions within the chakravanti include the Devasu, a group of warriors who protect members of the tradition who are often very gentle and kind-spirited against threats from the outside, usually based on prejudice. And to do this, they use bow and arrow magic in martial arts. The Philid, village patrons, usually
Bow and arrow magic. Part of me wants to say, do you mean archery? Another part of me remembers what the elves in Warhammer Fantasy can do, like the Sisters of Avalor and their magical arrows.
found in the British Isles that make sure the dead stay in their graves, and the Chakramuni, who take deep delves into the world of the dead to keep tracks of goings on there and various reincarnations that are occurring, so that the tradition at large is always knowledgeable about what's going to happen next. Some unusual chakravanti may include a stage magician, maybe a little bit fatalistic, maybe a little bit emo, who is also extremely good at blackjack and poker, or perhaps straight up a necromancer who studies the concept of death by temporarily reviving corpses. Such chakravanti do exist. They're just seen with a lot of suspicion by the rest of the tradition, and also pretty easy to spot because they quickly accumulate the death resonance genre. The Kha'vadi also...
The death resonance. I wonder what that is. Also, by the way, the fact that those chakravanti who revive the dead, I imagine that part of why they're viewed with suspicion is also because, well, wouldn't raising the dead be reversing the cycle that they're supposed to be protecting? So I guess that that be a reason why they'd be treated with suspicion, not just by other mages, but also even by other chakravanti.
Also known as the Dream Speakers, are the most diverse of the 9 traditions, partly because part of their foundational process was the idea that this is the tradition of miscellaneous minorities around the world who believe that trees have souls. I'm pretty sure that when they came up with Mage originally, they made the Kha'vadi, which were then only called Dream Speakers, as just... And then this is the one if you want to play a shaman from an ethnic group. Any ethnic group, could be African, could be Native American, could be Aboriginal, Australian. What's the difference, really? Then that's when you would have went with this tradition, which, I mean, let's be honest, that's a little bit iffy. That's a little bit problematic, a little bit, it doesn't sit right. But they
Sounds like that decision kind of aged poorly.
actually managed to transform this into something very cool and self-aware by basically going, look, the Council of 9 Traditions, it was founded in Europe in the 15th century. It's going to be Eurocentric. It's going to think about European shit. Most of the traditions come out of Europe. The technocracy comes out of Europe. That's the enemy that they're fighting. So no matter the relatively progressive values that they had for their time, that time was still the 15th century, and they have since learned and adapted to new global paradigms. But even back then, all of these different groups forced together into the same category to fight a greater enemy so they could have allies. They realized that they did have something in common after all. And it wasn't just being considered savages by Europeans. They were animists of some description in their many different ways. Their magic paralleled in that they approached it as a conversation with spirits. It was all about communicating with the spirits that rely in the umbral realms. Primarily the
Talking to spirits and stuff actually also makes me think of, well, not just the shamanistic traditions, with all the different nature spirits, but also about how, if I remember correctly, in the Japanese Shinto belief, if they're all manners of gods. And these gods they can vary wildly in prestige and power. Like the majority of them, if I remember correctly, are very minor in their scope and scale. For example, you may have a god of a particular tree, just that sort of thing.
The middle umbra, but there's a lot of room for different kind of stuff here. On the Council of Nine Traditions, their seat is that of spirit, the magic relating to the energies, the properties, and the geography of the penumbra. It allows practitioners to walk the line between the real world of flesh and blood and the immaterial-ish world that runs parallel to it.
Also, I like how he put real in air quotes, because the whole approach mages have to reality. But also, I actually wonder then what the wraiths think of the dream speakers then.
Made of magic, and including beings that are made of magic. Mages use the sphere of spirit to communicate with the, spirits that exist on the other side of the gauntlet, which is the barrier between this world and the other one. Or really the other ones, plural. There's a whole can of worms, just the amount of stuff that exists out there. There's at least 3 main ones relating to mind, nature, and death, and then there's a bunch of regions and zones, and sometimes they overlap and other times they don't, and it's the barriers between them are not really entirely clear, and there's different ways of accessing different ones. Let's not get into that today. Skilled spirit mages can't just project their minds onto the other side. They can actually physically step over and summon, bind, banish, do all manner of things with the spirits that exist there as representations of concepts that are in the real world.
Oh, okay, so different than the spirit world of Wraith the Oblivion, then.
I really need to make clear that I'm using the term real world very rhetorically here to communicate what I mean. You can even walk into deep space if you're powerful enough. Taking care of the worlds beyond is something that a lot of Kha'vadi spend most of their time doing, helping them heal and maintaining them from the fallout of magical natural phenomena, but also often the carelessness of other mages. Their foci are immensely diverse, including anything that you've ever imagined some tribal shaman use to perform the rituals that they perform. Right, you have dances, you have animal calls, you have the peace pipe. A very classic standout one is that the practitioners will allow themselves to become possessed by certain spirits in order to achieve specific effects. Though to many, who is possessing whom is somewhat more questionable. This is mainly derived from West African magical traditions, where this is a very common thing to happen in many voodoo and sort of voodoo-adjacent circles, and also it has become very popular in the Caribbean historically. But because of the friendship and alliance of these various different disparate traditions united into the Kha'vadi, some of these practices have become very popular, even if they have no common cultural connector. They have learned from each other. The Kha'vadi,
I'm still very much enjoying how there's just so much crossover in things here, like how the repeated mention of, say, different Caribbean faiths, such as there's the Haitian voodoo, for example, the Rastafarians, etc., and some of them popped up in multiple traditions.
Kha'vadi have paid a heavy price for being who they are. Mages from other traditions have historically been perpetrators of the horrors of colonialism. They were participants in the enslavements of the various people groups that the Dream Speakers come from. Many were the times where the Kha'vadi used their political influence with the council to try and counteract the genocides committed against their peoples, with varying degrees of success. And even in the world of mages, there's a lot of racist stereotyping.
Yeah, I can only imagine in what the response from the dream speakers was when things like, say, smallpox blankets happened.
Perhaps a little bit of a silver lining, the Kha'vadi are probably the tradition with the best ability to resolve internal conflicts and stand together when it's necessary. An impressive feat considering the sheer range of different approaches to magic that exist within the tradition. It probably helps their diplomatic skills that part of the job has always been to mediate between the spirit world and the world of civilization. Lately, though, with the technocracy having truly taken over and actively stamping out many of the tribal belief systems from around the world, with the gauntlet thickening, becoming more difficult to pass, and the penumbra becoming increasingly calcified by the actions of pattern spiders. The Kha'vadi
Pattern spiders? I wonder what those are.
are finding themselves in a place where they need to innovate in order to survive. Even though they have great respect for their ancient traditions, especially considering that a lot of the time they are the last remnants of whatever culture they are from, many have started to turn to new types of spirits that have only recently begun appearing. Many, especially younger Kha'vadi, have begun to commune with spirits of plastic, fiberglass, and stainless steel.
I'm sorry, but spirits of plastic, fiberglass, and stainless steel?
Spirits that inhabit the virtual world of data are also increasingly important to their work. After centuries of survival,
Oh, so these spirits can be. Oh, right. Since you mentioned that they tend to embody concepts. Huh. I never really thought about the idea of something like a spirit embodying something man-made like that.
through adaptation and a sort of subterfuge syncretism, the Kha'vadi have a lot of experience at taking this particular path. A few of the classic groups, sects, and factions within the Kha'vadi include the Baruti, storytellers originally from Africa and still predominantly there, though many of them have traveled to the southern United States, whose focus is to find and learn the stories of various different people and peoples and seek the power of their retelling. The Red Spear Society, a tightly organized and very
Also, I find it quite admirable in a way, actually, that they're chronicling these, cultures and stuff, since there's also the mention of that many of the Kha'vadi were, well, the last bastions of whatever cultures they came from.
very much militant group that seeks to reclaim their various legacies from around the world. And the Spirit Smiths, a loose organization of creators and maintainers of magical artifacts that originated in northern Finland. And basically what they do is they make sure that the right fetishes are in the hands of the right people at the right times, and also not in the hands of the wrong people at the wrong times. Some rather unusual Kha'vadi might include
That sounds like a really complicated job, to be honest. Because it's like, how would they figure out who are the right people to have something at a given time, and who's the wrong people, unless maybe they're communicating with the chakravanti and finding out about the Dharma from them to get some hints as to where things need to be.
someone who sees himself specifically as the magical guardian of a particular city, communing with the spirit of that city and ensuring that the penumbra around it is in good health. Or perhaps someone who uses concepts of modern science to conserve and heal spirits she finds in the wild, and using her powers to, in a very literal sense, push back the tide of climate change. Youngest among the nine
Literally pushing back the rising sea levels.
traditions are the virtual adepts or the mercurial elite. Though some people will say that the mercurial elite is a specific subgroup of the virtual adepts, but then it's a very big subgroup of the virtual adepts, and then others say, no, we're all part of the mercurial elite. That's the real name of the tradition. It's a whole big mess of misnomers and disagreements on how terminology should be applied. It's ironic that they have no unified software standard. And what they are is the technomancers that alter the code of reality itself. You've probably seen The Matrix. Everyone has seen The Matrix. That is basically the virtual adepts' approach to the universe. They think of everything that exists as a sort of highly complex mathematical simulation, and if you are able to change the source code of that simulation, you can do anything. All that unrealistic shit they do with computers at CSI, child's play to the mercurial elite. Now, obviously, you must think, oh, this is rather a recent tradition, and that is true, though they can trace their earliest roots back to ancient Greece, Egypt, and China, where the first mathematical concepts were explored and even used for magic.
You know, I get the distinct feeling that they're going to use things like, say, a protractor or a t-square, or a calculator or some of their foci.
Especially during medieval Europe, though, and the dominance of the celestial chorus and all of the very sort of Christian stuff that was very strictly enforced, mathematical thinkers were often considered heretics, and so had to hide. One of their major refuges was the Middle East, where mathematics, and especially high mathematics, was not in fact considered heresy, but sort of worship of the great creation of Allah. The precursors of
if I remember correctly, one of the contributors to math and science flourishing in the Muslim world at one point was the coffee houses, where anyone could discuss really anything without judgment.
The virtual adepts were highly valued by influential sheiks, sultans, and caliphs, but among mages, they were always sort of odd for their unconventional approach to magic as a function of mathematics. This is why in Europe they became an instrumental part of the foundation process of the technocracy, part of the order of reason as it was known back then, to throw off the shackles of religious superstition. So for the longest time they existed as a prominent faction within the technocracy, officially founding themselves as the difference engineers in the early 19th century and constructing the first proto-version of the digital data web. The web...
Because given their names, I had for a moment been wondering about if they were part of the technocracy, well, or had been at some point, given, well, their names. But hearing that they used to be part of it, actually, how fitting.
Datasphere, also sometimes known as Reality 2.0 or even 3.0, is a sort of umbral zone that overlaps all the other umbrae but also exists independently of them. It's a type of fully immersive virtual reality which contains all electronics and calculatory devices through which electricity flows, all which run on some form of mathematics. In other words, the virtual adepts laugh at the concept of air-gapping your computer. It's still a machine that does maths, therefore it is part of the web. Though it has its own paths and geography, all of that is of course an illusion because it is all part of the same singular point. Like how you experience the internet, right? It's everywhere all the time, but you don't have to go there. Everything is just served up to you where you are sitting. The concept of distance doesn't really exist all that much over there. But it only truly popped into existence in its modern form when it was created by Alan Turing, who was a mage, in the 1940s. He was also then, assassinated by the technocracy, though they still deny this, and this incident, along with a whole list of other tension points that the virtual adepts always had with the larger technocracy, it led to them leaving the technocracy and becoming a magical tradition. They were quick to join the Council of Nine Traditions, where they they were given the recently vacated seat of correspondence, a sphere obviously rather suited to them, and one that
Recently vacated. So I'm assuming that the technocracy used to be the ones who held the tradition of correspondence before they, started their thing.
it's immensely powerful in the modern world, though, let's be honest, it didn't used to not be powerful before. The sphere of correspondence might perhaps better be called the sphere of space, but that would imply that it is the very illusion that it isn't, because it turns out, and this is true, not just data is a sort of sphere that is only one point. All of reality is actually in one place. By realizing this, one can bend the shape of reality to one's needs. This has simple applications like clairvoyance or being able to project messages over great distances, but also stuff like levitation and teleportation, making spaces bigger on the inside, even being in multiple places at the same time. And while more traditional mages use foci like crystal balls, rune-carved portals, and inflated sheepskins
Inflated sheepskins. I find that funny considering that if I remember correctly, I think it was sheep bladders used to be used to make early condoms.
To have power over the sphere of correspondence, the virtual adepts use cyberdecks and quantum computers. Really anything that helps them do math works as a focus. They see reality as a simulation of some sort of mathematical source code. And I don't know if you've ever modded a game or used even the cheat codes that are part of the game in order to do some debugging, but if you're not very careful, things can get hella wonky very quickly. And reality is way more complex than GTA 5. So if you're not careful, it's very easy to break it, and we all know what happens to mages who break reality. So it is.
Yep. The reality people show up because they accumulate too much paradox. So then it actually sounds then and like the sphere of correspondence is incredibly powerful because, well, aside from just being able to send messages, but there's the literal spatial manipulation.
It is a bit reductive to think of them as just software mages. It doesn't even nearly encapsulate the sheer range of things that they can do. Being a fairly young tradition and somewhat organized and also already a splinter group of a splinter group of a splinter group, they don't have that many groups, sects, and factions internally, but they do have some specialist groups and groups that have particular political aspirations. The cyberpunks are anarchist mutualists who seek to use their powers to overthrow the institutions of capitalism backed by the technocracy. The anarchists
So fully automated space communism.
It is mainly because the institutions of communism are also backed by the technocracy. The cypherpunks.
Okay, that's funny. The technocracy backs both capitalism and communism.
Who are experts in code cracking and electronic warfare, and the Nexplorers, who dedicate their time to being fully immersed in the virtual net to create a post-everything utopia in it. A rather more unusual member of the Mercurial elite might be a sort of more old-school mathematician who does the math on a blackboard and maybe uses astrolabs and planimeters to do mathematical calculations, or a rather more nature-oriented adept who seeks to catalog in a zoological fashion the ecology of the spirits that exist in the data web and how they interact with the other Umbrae. Because remember, a USB stick is also a kind of magic crystal. Now, I know that a lot of
it's also funny to me actually about how they do all this. The whole thing about the post everything thing, it reminds me of the idea of how a post-scarcity society, because one of the things that you could do if you approached reality itself as though it were, well, software, is that you could just go copy X thing, paste it somewhere else, and just duplicate resources. Similar to how virtual items in, say, a game, just being data, can just be copied.
All of you are thinking, all this sounds very cool, but I thought this setting was about magic. So where are my wands? Where are my spell casting incantations? Where are my pointy hats? Where are my ancient towers? Where is my weird sort of idiosyncratic parallel society hidden in the walls of the open society? Where are my
So basically, where's Hogwarts?
wizards? Well, fear not, friend, for the Order of Hermes has got you covered. The ideas of the Order of Hermes date back to the earliest times in human civilization, with the invention of the written word, where people started to understand that words, whether spoken or written, had real power over the things that they represented. This is the origin of the most important focus of the Hermetic Order, the magic spell. The organization as we know it today.
It also reminds me a bit of the idea in D&D of demons having true names, and how if someone knows the demon's true name, that gives you power over them.
Today was founded soon after the fall of the Western Roman Empire by a group of powerful mages who decided that they wanted to study and emulate the teachings of the ascended mage and factual god Hermes Trismegistus. This conclave thought of itself as the ultimate group of enlightened magic understanders. People who had achieved godlike power through discipline, study, and dedication. And it's easy to think that when you're a mega fucking jacked up, ultra powerful organization of unstoppable reality benders, you can just bend reality however much you want. However, from the very beginning, they were weighed down by the consequences of their own hubris. And the thing that they dedicated most of their time to doing was fighting amongst themselves and with every type of supernatural creature that they found. One of the most bellicose factions of the Order of Hermes.
For a moment there, I was expecting it to be a case of what they spend most of their time doing is trying to escape the reality police.
You might recognize the name of, the House Tremere, which was always at the center of some drama, and their leader's immense ego actually ended up costing them magic itself when Tremere turned himself and his leadership clade into a group of vampires. They suffered Gilgul and were henceforth forever disconnected from their avatars and unable to perform actual magic. Another thing that happens when you fight all the time, and this is true.
Yeah, that's sad. And though that, well, they are technically immortal, but at the same time, they've lost magic. Granted, blood magics are powerful still, but being able to warp reality itself, well, it seems like a bit better of a deal than just blood magic.
Is that a lot of innocent people just get sort of chucked in the meat grinder too? Violence is not generally a surgical tool. Of course, the noble and really kind of aristocratic Order of Hermes didn't really care as to the fate of the peasants living in their domains, but those peasants were sort of tired of their bullshit and very happy to support the witch-hunting operations of the Celestial Chorus. Of course, those ended up hitting primarily the kind of people that were not or only vaguely associated with the Hermetic Order. But even through all that, peasant revolts, the Black Death, fucking the Inquisition, the Hermetic Order remained aloof, didn't care about any of it. And, to an extent, rightly so. I mean, they were an immensely powerful organization with access to a lot of arcane secrets. Every swade taken out of them by the paw of a gigantic tiger was like a bee sting. It doesn't matter that you have 1,000,000 high-powered pumps when the thing you're trying to suck dry is the fucking ocean. When it came to the world of sleepers, the Hermetics were, and always had been, deeply embedded in the halls of the rich and powerful, the secret societies of occultism that pervade the upper classes. Their reach extended everywhere, and they had no shortage of sponsors. Except, of course, if you ignore your problems long enough, eventually they come back to fuck you in the ass, and that is exactly what happened to the Hermetics, who were suddenly finding themselves almost alone, without allies, confronted with a new foe, the Order of Reason, who were playing their game, but better.
Ah yes, the technocrats.
Imagine the debasement and the shame of having to stoop so low as to co-found the Council of Nine Traditions, along with the prayer bead sucking supplicants and the Afro-spiritist savages. Nowhere is the fact that every tradition includes mages that specialize in any sphere better exemplified than in the Order of Hermes. Because even though it was clear that it was going to be one sphere of magic per tradition, only one, many of the especially conservative members of the Order of Hermes were insulted that this rule would actually be adhered to for the Order of Hermes. I mean, they were exceptional. They were the best of mages. Even though
it is hilarious to me in a way that they're just so up their own asses, is that there's like that they just believe surely these rules could not apply to higher mages such as themselves.
Though they were of the opinion that they should have been given all of the seats, ultimately the Order of Hermes was given the seat of forces, which regards the transfer of energies, be that motion, combustion, or discharge. In other words, it is the sphere of fireballs and lightning bolts. But it's not just earthquakes and hurricanes that can be created, controlled, and diffused with forces. Light and sound are also manifestations of forces. They are excellent tools of stealth by creating cloaks of invisibility or phantom sounds and imagery. And just to make this clear, it is the manipulation of energy in both ways. You can add energy to a system so you can make things hot, but you can also subtract energy from a system. You can make things colder.
So potentially, say, flash freezing something, but also, since for example, that whole sound thing that you mentioned, if you get the right frequency, you can literally just vibrate something apart, or liquefy a person into a flesh smoothie.
Although, of course, philosophically speaking, the adding energy to make it hotter and retracting energy to make it colder is a modern scientific paradigm. They would often think of making it colder as adding cold energy. The effect is ultimately the same. The reason the Hermetics ultimately chose forces as their seat is because it looks flashy, and it makes them look like wizards in a very obvious way. The Order of Hermes likes to claim that it takes the best, most gifted magical applicants up into its ranks, but the real truth of the matter is that it very often are people from rather privileged backgrounds. That does not, however, mean that they are mollycoddled just because they're like upper-class aristocrats. Apprenticing in the Order of Hermes is fucking tough. They're a very hierarchical organization, and students are expected to obey the commands of their teachers.
So just like the House of Tremere, and that whole obsession with pyramids and hierarchy.
Also love secrets. Oh, secrets. How they love them. And the more advanced, the more powerful, the more responsible you become in the order, the more access you get to those secrets, but also the more like involved in hermetic politics and the more isolated from the outside world you become. You know, like a cult. You can see where Clan Tremere gets its structure from, right? Like you can see the parallels. The order is organized into houses named after their founders. You know, like Hogwarts, except everyone is Dolores Umbridge. Oh, except for House X Miscellanea, which I swear to God is just a house that they made to put in all the other houses that weren't like pure-blooded enough for them. So I guess everyone is Lucius Malfoy as well. Some of these houses include House Flambeau, who are...
I cannot think of Malfoy without just remembering how I think was it Draco was the son, right? I still just remember him getting turned into a weasel.
Powerful war mages and traditionally represent the order on the council. House Shaea, probably the oldest of all the houses, which nonetheless was, even though they were like the keepers of true names, like the things that actually hold power over all objects in the world, considered part of House X Miscellanea until the 80s because, you know, they were brown people from Egypt. And
you know, how fitting considering that the Hermetic Order is, you know, full of aristocrats, and given the already Eurocentric nature of Mage society.
House Solificati, an order of alchemists and transmuters who have, over the course of history, been aligned with all of the major factions, not because they are fence-sitters, but because they really love betraying people. Given the strict nature of the order, it is unusual to be an unusual hermetic, but this might look like someone with a fascination for the modern trappings of cyberspace who uses technological devices as part of their hermetic magic. There's a lot of mysticism and hermeticism in like the circuitry on circuit boards. Have you ever looked at those? It's kinda cool. Or specifically, a collector of non-European, non-hermetic spells that are learned, studied, deconstructed, and put back together as real, proper hermetic magic. The Sahaji.
And I think I'll stop here, and do part 3 tomorrow. So it was certainly fun to watch. I've been enjoying hearing about the different traditions, and I really hope that you guys have enjoyed watching with me. For those who aren't doing so already, I highly recommend checking out the TheBurgerkrieg's channel. A link to the original video will be in the description box below. But until next time, thanks for watching, and I wish you all a wonderful day. Ta-ta!